If Ranger hadn't started digging that morning, no one would have ever found the fabric. And if no one had found the fabric, St. Bridget's Church would have kept its secret buried forever. But that's the thing about dogs, especially retired canines. They don't forget what humans choose to ignore. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday in Langston Falls, the kind of sleepy Midwest town where you leave your keys in the ignition and still find your truck untouched. Church bells echoed across the cornfields, coffee brewed on porches, and local kids rode bikes barefoot past white picket fences. Officer Ryan Callahan was already 2 hours into his shift, half coffee, half boredom, when the call came in. Noise complaint at St. Bridget's, backlot area. Probably just teenagers, the dispatcher had said. Ryan rolled his eyes. Copy that. Heading over now. In the passenger seat, Ranger, his gray-muzzled German Shepherd partner, let out a low, anticipatory whine. Ranger wasn't technically active duty anymore. He'd retired 2 years ago, after nearly a decade of working narcotics and search and rescue with Ryan. But these days, he came along on patrols more for companionship than anything else. His eyes were a little cloudy, his legs stiff in the mornings. But when something caught his attention, it was like a switch flipped. And that morning, as they pulled up behind the church, the switch flipped hard. St. Bridget's looked peaceful as ever. The red brick chapel stood quietly under a canopy of old maples, their July leaves rustling like whispered secrets. There were no teenagers in sight, just birdsong and the occasional creak from the old parish fence. False alarm, Ryan muttered, stepping out. But Ranger didn't wait for a leash. He bolted straight from the SUV, nose low to the ground, toward a patch of overgrown earth behind the chapel's rear entrance. "Ranger!" Ryan shouted. "Get back here!" The dog didn't listen. Instead, he started digging. At first, Ryan was annoyed, then puzzled, then deeply, instinctively unsettled, because Ranger wasn't just scratching at the soil. He was full-on clawing like his life depended on it. Ears pinned back, body tense, every movement urgent and purposeful. Ryan approached, hand on his holster out of habit, even though there was no visible threat. "Ranger, what are you?" And then he saw it. A piece of cloth, barely visible under the disturbed dirt. Ryan crouched down, brushed it off carefully. It was old, faded, black and white, with delicate stitching at the hem. Looked like a nun's habit. He froze. St. Bridget's hadn't housed a convent in years, not since the early 90s. The nuns had left, or so everyone believed. Moved to another diocese, the church said at the time. But this fabric, it was thick with age, stained, and had clearly been buried. And Ranger wasn't done digging. Ryan radioed it in. "Possible evidence located behind St. Bridget's, requesting backup and forensics." His voice remained steady, but his stomach churned. Something didn't feel right. Neighbors gathered, drawn by the flashing lights. Among them were churchgoers and elderly parishioners, holding their coffee cups and whispering among themselves. Father Doyle, the church's aging pastor, shuffled out with a cane and squinting eyes. "Officer Callahan, is everything all right?" Ryan stood, holding the folded fabric in a gloved hand. "Does this look familiar, Father?" The priest blinked slowly. "It may belong to one of the sisters from the old convent, but that was years ago. They left in 1990. "Did they leave quietly?" Ryan asked. Father Doyle didn't answer right away. Then he sighed. "People come and go, officer. Not everything has a story." Ryan wasn't so sure about that. Back behind the chapel, Ranger had moved 6 feet to the left and started digging again. This time, he unearthed what looked like an old rusted crucifix, then a rotted shoe, then something even worse. A lock of black hair, matted and buried beneath layers of dirt. Ryan turned away to breathe. He wasn't a rookie. He'd seen bodies before. Accidents, suicides, even a homicide or two. But this felt older. More sacred. Like they were disturbing a grave no one wanted disturbed. And yet, someone had buried these things behind a holy place and never spoken a word. If you love stories where animals help uncover buried truths, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Heroes for Animals, for more real and fictional tales celebrating the bravest companions we have. The forensics team arrived 2 hours later. The area was roped off, cameras flashed, samples were bagged. But even then, Ryan had a feeling they were only scratching the surface, literally and figuratively. That afternoon, a clerk at City Hall dropped off a manila folder at the station. Inside were archived church records from the late 80s to early 90s. On the very last page was a brief note. June 17, 1990. Sisters Margaret, Anne, and Lucia reassigned to St. Gabriel's Abbey. Farewell ceremony cancelled due to illness. Ryan frowned. He called St. Gabriel's Abbey. No one by those names had ever arrived. That night, Ryan sat on his porch sipping a beer, watching Ranger sleep at his feet. The old dog twitched in his dreams, paws moving like he was still digging. "Whatever you found," Ryan murmured, "we're just getting started." He didn't know it yet, but Ranger had just uncovered the first thread in a decades-old tapestry of lies, buried behind a church, protected by silence and guarded by faith. And nothing about this case was going to be simple. If you'd told Officer Ryan Callahan a week ago that his retired K-9 partner would dig up the first real lead in a 35-year-old cold case, he would have laughed it off and gone back to refilling coffee at the station. But now, as he stared down at the evidence board in front of him, tacked with photos of stained fabric, brittle hair strands, and black and white photos of 3 missing nuns, he wasn't laughing. He was obsessed. The town of Langston Falls had always been quiet. That's what everyone liked about it. A little too quiet, maybe. Especially when it came to certain topics, like what happened at St. Bridget's Church in the summer of 1990. 3 nuns, Sister Margaret, Sister Lucia, and Sister Anne, had vanished overnight. No goodbye, no forwarding address, no explanation. At the time, the church released a short statement. They had been reassigned for urgent personal matters and would not be returning. And just like that, they were gone. No real police inquiry, no missing person flyers, no pressure from the community. They were nuns, after all, servants of God. Who questions holy people disappearing? Apparently, no one. Until now. Ryan sat in the small windowless office at the Langston Falls PD, flipping through the faded documents again. He'd requested every record he could get his hands on from both the town archives and the diocese. Most of them were vague. Some were redacted. A few were missing altogether. But 2 things stood out. First, the last known address for the 3 nuns was St. Bridget's. There was no evidence they ever arrived at the abbey where they were allegedly transferred. Second, a parishioner had filed a complaint on the very night they disappeared, June 17, 1990. The complaint stated screaming and chanting had been heard from behind the chapel after dark. That complaint was marked resolved. No action taken. Ryan rubbed his temples. Someone dropped the ball big time. Or maybe someone never wanted it picked up. He visited the local library and pulled microfilm from the Langston Gazette archives. In the editions following the date of disappearance, there were no articles about the nuns. None. But there was one curious piece from July 3, 1990. It was buried on page 9, next to a gardening column. Church to seal garden area for renovation. The article claimed the backlot area, exactly where Ranger had started digging, was to be sealed off to allow nature to regrow in a prayerful space. Ryan snorted under his breath. Sealed off? You buried something. You didn't plant flowers. Later that day, Ranger led him back to the chapel. Despite his age, the dog was full of nervous energy, tail twitching, paws shuffling on the church grounds. Callahan had returned with a warrant to begin formal excavation of the rear garden. Father Doyle objected, loudly, but the court order was ironclad. And the moment the first layer of soil was removed, Every officer on site knew they were looking at something serious. Human remains, two skeletons curled side by side in shallow graves. Forensics took over immediately. Bones were bagged, photos taken. Cross necklaces and rosary beads were recovered near the remains. And a third grave, empty, had clearly been disturbed, then filled again years ago. A mistake or an intentional message? Ryan couldn't decide. That night, he called Clara Hensley, a retired town librarian in her late 70s. She'd lived in Langston Falls her whole life. When Ryan told her about the discovery, she went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You need to talk to Ruby." "Ruby?" "Ruby Alvarez. She was a housekeeper at St. Bridget's, lived in the convent quarters. She's in a care home now, Sunset Oaks. Doesn't talk much, but if anyone knows what happened that night, it's her." Ryan was there the next morning. Sunset Oaks was quiet and smelled of lemon cleaner and loneliness. Ryan found Ruby in the common room, sitting by the window, knitting with trembling hands. He introduced himself gently and asked about her time at St. Bridget's. Her eyes stayed distant until he mentioned the nuns' names. Sister Margaret, Sister Lucia, Sister Anne. Her hands stopped moving. Then, in a soft, raspy voice, "They were good women, brave, too brave." Ryan leaned forward. "What happened to them?" Ruby's eyes misted. "They saw something, or maybe heard something they weren't meant to." She paused. "There was a girl, brought in late one night, not from town. She screamed like the devil had crawled into her throat." "A possession?" Ryan asked. Ruby nodded, barely. "That's what they said. But Sister Margaret didn't believe it. She wanted to call outside help. Father Doyle said no. Said it had to be handled in-house." "And then?" Ruby swallowed hard. "And then the sisters were gone. We were told they'd transferred, but no one said goodbye. And their room, their things were still there." She looked out the window. "I asked Father Doyle once. He told me if I ever brought it up again, I'd be excommunicated." Ryan felt cold spread through his chest. "Was there ever a funeral?" "No." "Did anyone report them missing?" "No one dared." That night, he couldn't sleep. He opened his laptop and started drafting a case file. The disappearance of the St. Bridget's 3. He created a timeline, connected the dots. He pinned the noise complaint, the fake transfer, the article about sealing the garden, the witness testimony. Everything pointed to one thing. Someone had orchestrated a cover-up. The next morning, Ranger barked to go outside. Ryan followed him into the yard, expecting a bathroom break. Instead, Ranger headed toward the old fence bordering the orchard, tail stiff, nose twitching. Ryan followed with a flashlight, even though the sun was already up. And there, behind the last row of trees, he found something sticking out from the soil. A crucifix, smaller than the others, child-sized. He knelt down, heart pounding. Beside it was a half-buried tin box, rusted from rain and time. Inside, a torn page from a hymnal, and written on it in fading ink, "They tried to protect me, but no one protects them." Ryan stared at the note for a long time. He had more questions now than answers. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened behind St. Bridget's wasn't holy. It was something else entirely. And thanks to Ranger, the town would finally have to face it. Ryan Callahan had been a cop for 13 years. He'd seen ugly, violent break-ins, overdose scenes, domestic fights gone sideways. But this was the first time he'd seen the earth itself try to keep a secret. The backlot of St. Bridget's looked like a construction site now. Tarp tents, evidence markers, and a ground that looked freshly wounded. The bones of 2 women had already been uncovered, carefully bagged and transported to the county forensic lab. And Ryan had a gut feeling they weren't done digging. Not even close. The crucifix Ranger had found out by the orchard stayed on Ryan's desk, placed on a clean cloth, beside the torn page from the hymnal. "They tried to protect me, but no one protects them." He'd stared at that sentence for hours the night before. It read more like a confession than a clue. A child had written it. He was sure of that now. The uneven script, the broken grammar, the way the letters bent at weird angles. But it wasn't just the message. It was where the message had been hidden. Why would someone bury a note like that outside the chapel grounds? Unless they'd been trying to lead someone back. Ranger started acting strange the next day. Not just his usual old dog shuffle routine. He was pacing, restless, circling the churchyard, then doubling back to the rear entrance of the chapel. He scratched at the old brick wall near the sacristy door. Then he pawed at the gravel path that used to be a walkway, now covered in weeds and moss. Ryan watched him for a few minutes. "You're chasing something, aren't you, bud?" Ranger barked once, then began sniffing along the base of the chapel wall like he was tracing a memory. Ryan followed him until he stopped cold, nose pointed straight at the old wooden bench near the statue of St. Michael. The bench had been there forever. It was warped from decades of sun and storm, its paint long faded. But behind it, tucked between the stone wall and a patch of ivy, Ryan noticed something new, a thin crack in the foundation. He got down on one knee and ran his fingers along it. Cold air pushed out from behind the stone. There was space back there, too much space. Later that afternoon, Ryan returned with a structural engineer from the county and a pair of local contractors who owed the PD a favor. It didn't take long for them to realize what they were looking at. "That's a sealed door," one of the men said, standing with his hands on his hips. "Probably covered up decades ago. See the shape in the stone? Arched. Standard for early 1900s religious buildings." Ryan nodded slowly. "So there's a room back there." The contractor shrugged. "Could be a wine cellar. Could be a crypt." The engineer added, "Or a private space no one wanted found." They worked through the evening. By nightfall, the door had been carefully broken open, and the smell hit them before they even stepped inside. It was cool, musty, and thick with the scent of time. Not rot, at least not fresh, but old wood, old stone, and something metallic that clung to the back of your throat. The flashlight beam swept across the space. It was a chamber, maybe 20 by 30 feet, with stone walls and a dirt floor. A single wooden table sat in the middle. 4 unlit candles still stood in place. Dust coated everything. To the left, shelves lined with old jars, holy books, and a thick coil of rope. To the right, something worse. A metal frame, shaped like a narrow cot, rusted through in spots. Leather restraints still dangled from its corners. Ryan's voice caught in his throat. "What the hell was this place?" One of the contractors muttered, "Looks like some kind of old penance room, like the old monks used. Silence chambers." Another whispered, "Or exorcism." They all stood quiet for a moment. Ranger growled low and backed away. Back at the station, Ryan called the district attorney. The discovery of a hidden chamber under a religious institution opened a new legal front. Property rights, religious exemption, potential historic protections. It was a mess. But one thing was clear. The church was hiding more than bones. The next morning, Ryan requested blueprints of St. Bridget's from county archives. He figured they'd confirm what they already knew about the chapel layout. But when the plans arrived, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There was no mention of a lower-level chamber beneath the sacristy. None. That space didn't exist on record, which meant someone built it off the books, and someone sealed it on purpose. Ryan needed answers, and he knew exactly who to ask. Father Doyle was at St. Anthony's Hospital, recovering from what the parish board called exhaustion. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, older, thinner. Ryan pulled up a chair and sat. "You lied," he said. No preamble. The old priest blinked. "Excuse me? You said the nuns left voluntarily, but 2 of them are dead. And the third? Still missing." Doyle's voice cracked. "I didn't know." "Oh, you did," Ryan cut in. "You helped cover it up. I found the cellar. I found the restraints. I found the crucifix buried outside the orchard." Silence. Then, finally, Father Doyle whispered, "They wanted to help her." Ryan leaned forward. Help who? The priest stared ahead, unfocused. The girl. She was possessed. At least, that's what we thought. Ryan said nothing. She was feral when they brought her in. No last name, maybe 12 years old, eyes black as ash, no family, just evil in her. And the nuns? Ryan asked. They tried to intervene, said it wasn't right, that she needed medical help, not holy rites. But the bishop had already sent orders. And then? Father Doyle's eyes glistened. They went into the cellar with her. All three. Ryan's breath hitched. And only one came out? The priest nodded. We never found her again. Not even a body. That night, Ryan sat on his porch, the case file thick in his lap. The night was quiet, and Ranger lay at his feet, tail twitching in his sleep. Ryan lit a cigarette, his first in 3 years, and stared into the dark. This case had stopped being about missing nuns. It wasn't even just about the church. It was about the truth people were willing to bury. About blind faith. About power unchecked. And about a girl who was either possessed or silenced. The cellar had been sealed for 35 years. But now that the door was open, it was like the silence of the dead had come rushing back through Langston Falls. And it was loud. Whispers behind closed doors, shaken looks in the pews, long-time parishioners walking out of Mass and not coming back. The discovery beneath St. Bridget's had shattered more than bricks and mortar. It had cracked the illusion of safety the town clung to. But for Officer Ryan Callahan, it had only confirmed what he already suspected. This wasn't just a case. It was a cover-up. The media hadn't gotten hold of it yet. Thank God. But the town was buzzing. Ryan was getting sideways looks at the grocery store. A few polite, "You sure you should be digging into church business?" from older men in ball caps. Even his own mother had called him that morning to ask, "Ryan, do you really want to be the one dragging skeletons out of the past?" He didn't answer her, because it wasn't about wanting. It was about needing to know the truth, and the truth had just gotten a new witness. Her name was Denise Arlen. She showed up at the precinct without an appointment, walking straight up to the front desk with a nervous energy that said she'd almost turned around 10 times before getting out of the car. "I need to speak to Officer Callahan. It's about the church." Ryan took her into interview room 2, the one with the broken ceiling fan and the chairs that creaked too much. Denise was in her early 50s, denim jacket over a faded Green Bay Packers tee. Her hands never stopped moving, rubbing her thighs, picking at her nails, clasping and unclasping like a nervous ritual. "I used to go to St. Bridget's," she said, "back in high school. My mom made me. I hated it." Ryan sat back. "What changed your mind?" She laughed without humor. "Nothing. I never liked it. But I did see something. Back in '90, June." He leaned in. "My cousin Tommy. He was an altar boy then. We used to sneak behind the chapel during youth group. That night, we heard screaming." Ryan felt the hair on his neck rise. Not like angry yelling, screaming, like someone was getting hurt. She swallowed. "Tommy saw them. The 3 nuns. They were dragging a girl down the back hallway. She was fighting them, screaming in Latin, or what sounded like it. I don't know. She looked wrong, like she didn't belong in her skin." "Did your cousin ever tell anyone?" Denise shook her head. "He told me. That's it. He was too scared. Said the girl's eyes were hollow. Said she laughed at him. Laughed while she was bleeding." Ryan paused. "What happened to Tommy?" She looked down. "He killed himself in 2003. After Denise left, Ryan stared at the wall for a long time. He thought of Ruby, the housekeeper, of Father Doyle's confession, of the hymnal page buried near the orchard. The picture was coming together, and it was a hell of a lot darker than anything he'd expected. A girl, possibly abused, certainly misunderstood. 3 women trying to protect her, and a church that saw none of them as worth saving. The forensics report came in late that afternoon. The 2 bodies recovered from the garden were indeed female. Advanced decay, but DNA analysis matched dental records. Sister Margaret and Sister Lucia both had skull fractures, blunt force trauma. The coroner was blunt. This wasn't natural death, and it wasn't suicide. They were killed. Ryan felt a strange mix of vindication and nausea. He'd known deep down, but hearing it made it real. Someone had murdered them, and whoever had sealed that cellar had done so knowing they were leaving behind a crime scene. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch again, Ranger curled up next to his boots. The cicadas buzzed in the humid July air, and somewhere down the block, someone was playing an old country song on a radio. It should have been peaceful, but the memory of that cellar kept clawing at him. The way the room had felt wrong, heavy, like something had watched them even after the lights were turned on. He lit a cigarette and stared at the crucifix still resting on his table. There was something missing. One more piece he hadn't uncovered yet. And Ranger, his best partner, his best friend, seemed to know it too. The dog stood up suddenly and padded to the edge of the porch, staring out toward the street. Then he barked. Once, sharp, alert. Ryan stood too. "What is it, boy?" Ranger darted down the steps and toward the cruiser. Not in fear, but focus. He was picking up a scent. They ended up back at St. Bridget's before midnight. The property was technically sealed, but Ryan had keys now, and enough probable cause to justify his presence. He let Ranger lead the way. The dog went straight to the back hall, the one Denise had mentioned, the one that led to the old convent living quarters. Most of that wing had been shut down since the early 2000s, but the architecture was still intact. Arched ceilings, dusty wood floors, stained glass windows faded to a dull pastel. Ranger scratched at a panel in the wall just beneath an old oil painting of St. Catherine. Ryan pushed the painting aside. Behind it, a square cut in the wall, patched with drywall. Sloppy work, covered in paint, but newer than the wall around it. He pulled out his multi-tool. "Cut it open!" Behind the panel, tucked into the hollow wall, was a satchel. A small leather bag tied with a rosary. Ryan opened it carefully, gloved up. Inside, letters, stacks of them, all in the same handwriting, dated between May and June '90. Each one addressed to Mother Agnes, each one signed Sister Anne. She'd never left. She'd hidden her testimony in the walls. Ryan began to read. The letters described everything. The arrival of the girl, unnamed, possibly orphaned. The rituals performed in secret. Midnight prayers, binding ceremonies, forced fasts. Sister Anne believed the girl was not possessed, but traumatized. She'd been abused, possibly by someone within the church. The nuns had tried to intervene. They had planned to report it. They had planned to leave. And then, as Anne wrote in her final letter, "They came for us. I heard them. Father Doyle. 2 men I didn't recognize. Margaret screamed. Lucia ran. I'm hiding now. I don't know if they'll find me. If someone reads this one day, please tell the world we didn't leave. We tried to protect her. We were punished for it." Ryan stared at the words until the ink blurred. He wasn't a man of the cloth, but tonight he said a prayer. For Sister Anne, for the girl, and for whatever was still waiting to be found. The letters from Sister Anne had shaken Officer Ryan Callahan more than he wanted to admit. He'd read each page twice, some 3 times. The ink was faded in places, the edges torn, smudged with what looked like fingerprints and tears. But the words were terrifyingly clear. This hadn't been a case of possession. It had been a case of protection. And someone, maybe multiple someones, had made sure the protectors never spoke again. Monday morning, the DA's office signed off on a new investigation. A formal cold case review into the 1990 disappearance and now confirmed homicides of Sister Margaret and Sister Lucia. Sister Anne was still listed as missing, presumed dead. And the girl, the one without a name, she was a ghost. No record, no files, not a photo, not even a baptismal certificate in St. Bridget's archives. She had simply appeared in 1990 and vanished after the cellar was sealed. Ryan needed answers, and fast. So he called the only person left who might still have a piece of the puzzle. Ruby Alvarez had been the housekeeper at the convent in the late 80s and early 90s. When Ryan returned to Sunset Oaks Senior Living, she was waiting in the garden room, sitting under a lemon tree mural, her cardigan neatly buttoned, hands folded on her lap. She looked up when he entered. "You found the letters, didn't you?" she asked softly. Ryan blinked. "How'd you know?" She smiled, sad and knowing. "Because Sister Anne told me where she hid them, the day before she vanished." He sat down slowly. "She came to me in tears, told me she was afraid, that they were going to hurt her for trying to speak out. She said she didn't trust the bishop, didn't trust Father Doyle, didn't trust the men they brought in after hours." Ryan leaned in. "Who were those men?" Ruby hesitated. "I don't know, but they weren't local. They drove a dark sedan with no plates, and they always came after midnight." Ryan felt his pulse quicken. "Do you remember the girl?" Ruby's eyes clouded. "Of course I do." She looked off, as if trying to piece together the image. She was thin, maybe 12 or 13, big brown eyes, hair like coal. She didn't speak at first, just rocked back and forth. But Sister Anne said she started opening up after a few days. "She ever say her name?" Ruby paused. "She told Sister Anne her name was Lena, but said not to write it down. Said if they knew she told someone, she'd disappear." Ryan nodded slowly. "Do you think she was possessed?" Ruby's answer came without hesitation. "I think she was abused." That word, abused, clanged in Ryan's head like a bell. Everything clicked. Lena hadn't needed an exorcism. She'd needed rescue. The sisters had tried to give it to her, and someone in the church had tried to silence all of them for it. He went straight to the State Child Welfare Archives. It took pulling a few strings, but he found what he was looking for: a series of internal records marked confidential, dated 1989, listing unidentified female minors taken in by church-run shelters throughout the state. One entry caught his eye. Female Estru 13, referred to as Lena, no last name, no school records, transferred under Bishop C. Halbridge supervision. Location, St. Bridget's, Langston Falls. Ryan slammed his fist on the desk. They'd buried her identity even in official records. No fingerprints, no birth date, just one word: transferred to a church with a hidden cellar. He pulled up everything he could on Bishop Conrad Halbridge. Deceased, 1998. Died in his sleep. Natural causes. But his name showed up in multiple transfer orders, including others involving orphaned or unclaimed girls sent to convents across the Midwest. Some ended up adopted. Some vanished completely. One had filed an anonymous claim in 2001, alleging ritual abuse at a cloistered retreat in Wisconsin. The case was dropped. Ryan's hands shook with anger. This wasn't just one case. This was a pattern. Back at home, Ranger was restless again. The old dog paced near the fireplace, nose low, tail twitching. Ryan had learned to trust that look. "You smell something, buddy?" he asked. Ranger walked to the hallway closet, used mostly for winter coats, and scratched once. Ryan opened the door, confused. The dog sniffed the floorboards, then sat, waiting. Ryan knelt down and tapped the wood. Hollow. There was a panel loose near the baseboard. He pried it up. Beneath it, covered in dust, was a folder. He stared at it in disbelief. He hadn't hidden it. So who had? He opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed, crisp. "They said I was cursed. I was just scared. The sisters tried to help me. They died for it. I'm sorry. Lena." Ryan sat there for a long time. It wasn't signed in ink, but it was signed in pain, and that was enough. The next morning, he called the sheriff's office in Grant County, Wisconsin, asked about retreat properties formerly operated by Bishop Halbridge's circle. Only one matched the timeline, and it had since been converted into a private women's rehab center. But the administrator on the phone paused when Ryan asked about past residents. "We have confidentiality protocols," she said. "But what's this about? There's a girl, Lena." No last name. Likely in her late 40s now. Brown eyes, dark hair. She might have been here sometime in the 2000s. The woman went quiet. Then, we had someone who fits that. She was with us in 2005, left suddenly, didn't leave a forwarding address, but she wrote letters. I kept one. It was disturbing. Ryan asked if she could fax it. An hour later, it came through. It read, "The dreams won't stop. The screaming, the cold floor, the straps. I see Sister Anne in my sleep. She tells me to tell the truth, but the truth killed them, and I don't want to die too." Ryan read it twice, and on the third time something in him broke. He picked up the phone. He was done chasing ghosts. It was time to find Lena. The town of Langston Falls would never look at St. Bridget's the same way again. The once proud red brick chapel that had stood untouched for over a century now felt different. The weight of truth made the air heavier inside its walls. The quiet no longer felt peaceful. It felt like penance. In the wake of Ryan Callahan's investigation, the churchyard had been officially closed to the public. Forensic tape surrounded the rear lot. The state had ordered a structural dig of the hidden cellar. And for the first time in 35 years, the names of Sisters Margaret, Lucia, and Anne were spoken with reverence and justice. But Ryan wasn't finished, because Lena was still out there, and she deserved more than to be remembered as a whisper. He followed every lead, starting with the rehab facility in Wisconsin, where she'd briefly stayed under an alias. The administrator confirmed the woman's presence in 2005, said she had come in fragile, quiet, full of trauma, and left in the middle of the night without notice. No ace. No records, only a name written on her application. Elena Cruz. Ryan ran it through every database he had access to. Dead end. He tried variations. Lena Cruz, Elena Cross, even false names from other diocese-run shelters in the 90s. Finally, he caught a break. In a 2008 intake form from a low-income women's shelter in Milwaukee, there was a woman who gave her name as Lena M. Under comments, someone had written, "Severe religious trauma, does not trust clergy, asks for room with no crucifix." Ryan called the shelter. The director on record had retired, but after a few phone calls, he found her. Margaret Fields, now living in a small town outside Madison. She remembered Lena. She was smart, quiet, had this way of looking at you like she was expecting to be lied to, Margaret said. She stayed 3 weeks, never said where she came from. But one night she woke up screaming, said, "The church buried me. The sisters tried to pull me out." That's when I knew it was deeper than I could ever fix. Do you know where she went after? She mentioned Oregon, said she had a friend out there, another girl from one of the homes. Ryan thanked her and hung up. Then he packed a bag. 2 days later, he was in Eugene, Oregon, standing outside a modest bakery tucked between a used bookstore and a flower shop. The sign above the door read, "Crumb and Clover." Inside, the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread filled the air. A few customers chatted over coffee. Indie music played softly through ceiling speakers. Behind the counter stood a woman with dark hair pulled into a bun. Early 40s. Calm presence. Sharp eyes. Ryan recognized her before she saw him. He waited in line. When it was his turn, she gave him a customer service smile. "What can I get you?" "A cinnamon roll and a name," he said gently. "Your real one." Her face didn't change right away, but her eyes did. They flicked down to his badge on his hip, then back to his face. She took a slow breath. Then she said, "You came a long way." They sat outside at a corner table, away from the buzz of the morning rush. Lena didn't touch her coffee. "I thought about telling someone," she said after a long pause. "But every time I did, I'd see their faces, the sisters, especially Anne. She hid me in the orchard that night, told me to stay quiet, said she'd come back." She looked down. She never did. Ryan said nothing. "She wasn't supposed to die," Lena continued. "None of them were. I thought if I stayed away, they'd leave me alone. But they kept sending people. priests, men in suits, even years later. "Do you remember their names?" Ryan asked. She shook her head. "Only voices. They called me cursed, said I had the devil inside me. But the sisters, they saw past it. They knew I was just a scared kid." "You weren't cursed," Ryan said. "You were failed." Lena wiped a tear from her cheek. Did they find all of them?" she asked. "We found Margaret and Lucia. We believe Anne died hiding the letters she left. But you helped give them justice, Lena. You being here proves they were telling the truth." She nodded slowly. "I'm just tired of running." Ryan smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time to stop." In the following weeks, Lena agreed to give an anonymous deposition to state authorities. Her account, combined with Ryan's findings, opened an internal investigation into the Diocese of Mid-State. Several cases were re-examined, files reopened, survivors contacted, and for the first time, a plaque was installed in the back garden of St. Bridget's, in memory of sisters Margaret, Lucia, and Anne, for their bravery, their compassion, and their silence, broken, June 17, 1990, never forgotten. Ranger, old as he was, stood proudly beside the crowd at the dedication ceremony. Someone even made him a little medal that read, "Justice Hound." Kids took photos with him. Ryan scratched his ears and whispered, "Good boy," because none of the discoveries, the reopened cases, the healing, would have happened without him. All because one stubborn German shepherd wouldn't stop digging. Later that night, Ryan sat on his porch again, just like all those restless nights before. Only now, it felt different, peaceful, earned. Ranger lay beside him, nose twitching in sleep, probably chasing something in his dreams. Ryan held a copy of Sister Anne's last letter in his lap. He looked at the final line again. "If someone reads this one day, tell the world we didn't leave. We tried to protect her. We were punished for it." He whispered softly to the wind, "The world knows now, sister. And we heard you." Thank you for following this story all the way to the end. It's been a journey of mystery, faith, silence, and truth. What would you have done if you were in Ryan's shoes? Or Lena's? Do you believe some secrets are meant to stay buried? Or should every truth eventually come to light? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where the heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just wear a vest and have 4 paws.